Hello, Malik Currington here, Family Budget Fisherman. Thank you for tuning in to another episode. I'm getting into my rod reviews, and as you read in the thumbnail and the description below, I'm going to be reviewing for you the BassX by St. Croix. Stay tuned. Let's get started. All right. Well, I hope that all of you have been waiting for this rod review. This is one of the most hotly anticipated rods to be released at this price point of $120. Thankfully, this is not one of the rods that went up in price in the last year or so. So I can now officially give you my 24 hours on the water experience. That will include all kinds of references to fish catches and so forth. Now, it was very tough because this is the winter for the entire country. It just so happened that in California here, we resist cold weather to a great degree in most sections. We get some rain and so forth, but we experience enough droughts so that for as far as fishing opportunities, there are more of them than they are in most other parts of the country. Oh, by the way, I'm only going to give you performance. I may reference a little bit on tech specs, but I think that I handled in the last video my first impressions. There were enough tech specs discussed in that video, and I just looked at it just prior to recording this video. There were enough tech specs in that video that I don't have to revisit this issue, but I will link it at the end of this video for those of you who have not seen that. So you're going to get a lot of performance in this video. Let me give you my overall. If there is a 10 to 1 range, 1 being worse, 10 being best, this rod in terms of, in its category, this rod is an 8. It may even be a 9, okay? And I'll tell you why I gave it the 8 that it is. Let's split the difference. Let's say an 8.5, an 8.5. It is way up there. And here's the main reason why. This rod handled fantastically for baits that I threw. I caught bass, crappie, salmon, trout, bluegill. I caught a lot of different types of bait on this. I had a lot of fun with catching bass and crappie on here, and primarily because bass and crappie hang out in a lot of the same areas during the wintertime here in California. And the catfish will oftentimes hang out if they're big bait balls. So, but I had a marvelous time with this rod. Now, I threw all kinds of baits. And I have a few down here. I threw the spy bait, caught fish on the spy bait. It's a cold water bait. That's why I'm bringing it up. I threw the jerk bait. Okay, this is the ripstop by Rapala. I think I said in one other video, I'm going to keep saying Rapala until an official from Rapala tells me what it is. So Rapala. I threw the spinner bait. Didn't catch as many fish. I did catch some small fish on it though. I threw some top water. Interestingly enough, I caught some fish on the top water. I threw the chatterbait. I caught 1 fish on the chatterbait. Threw a frog. Now the frog that I threw a floating frog, didn't catch anything, but I threw this submersible frog and caught fish. I caught fish on the Berkeley baits. Different kinds of baits. I think this is the Demiki shad. I caught fish on that. Certainly caught fish. I mean, you only can catch fish on worm baits like this one here, and different worm baits, Ned, different colors. I caught them on that, and you really need to hang up your fishing if you don't catch fish on, where is it? If you don't catch fish on a Kayak, You know, you really just hang up your fishing career if you don't catch fish on the Kayak, and I did. Now, oh, interestingly enough, I caught them. Is this a silent one? It's a very, you probably can't hear it because of a very faint knock on this one. I threw silent type square bills and louder square bills. And this is one of those square bills that has that little fun looking bill on the front. I threw all kinds of baits. I threw tube baits. I threw crawl baits, both large and small. Here's some of my favorite small crawl baits. Well, this is actually creature bait that I threw. Love throwing creature baits. This is a crawl bait that I threw, and I threw it with an open hook on it. And that was because in some of the areas where the water was really, really cold, and I wanted to be able to catch the fish, I was willing to sacrifice lures that got hung up. I needed to, you know, to be able to really just set the hook, because they would bite and hold. They wouldn't bite and move. So it made setting the hook a little bit more difficult. Those of you who fished a while, you know what I'm talking about. So I gave you all of those listings so that you know that I caught a lot of fish on a lot of baits. I mean, I didn't even bring up the jigs that I caught the crappie on, or anything like that. Crappie, salmon, and trout, by the way. But I did. I caught a lot of fish on this. I would say I probably caught, rough estimate, maybe 30 fish in total over that 24-hour dedicated time that I had with them. And remember, if this was springtime, I could probably double or even triple that. But we're still in the winter. So, you know, fish catches can be meager when you're not fishing places where they plant fish. In California, they certainly plant a lot of trout, and I could have lived off of just catching trout, but not real big fan on planted trout. For my kids, yeah, but not for me. So this rod performed fantastically. I paired it with the Revo X30, or 30X, if some who say that way. And I am very happy with the performance. I would recommend this rod over a number of rods. Let's say, for example, you are an intermediate fisherman, or you are a beginner fisherman who wants to start off with a little better quality rod than a sub $100 rod could give you. This will be a good place. $120. It may go up to $130. It looks like everything is going up in price, but not going up in quality. But nonetheless, here you go. Matter of fact, this the reel, I think, is now nationally, I think it's about $120 now. Some places had already had it at $110, but I think it's now $120, which makes this combo a $240 combo, if you could believe that. So I threw mostly with a fluorocarbon leader, as you can see here. Everybody knows, if you've been on my channel, I use a snap, and I used braided line. Now, this is the Fins 2-pound test diameter, 15-pound test break strength line, and that's how I had it rigged. I would oftentimes cut it and put the snap up here so that I could throw the top water, just because I didn't want to just switch to another rod. I probably could have gotten 2 rods so I could do one top water and one, underneath the water going toward the bottom. So the only time that I really had a struggle was with the weightless Senko. And I'll tell you why. This rod is a bass fisherman's, this is a good investment. I wouldn't say a dream rod, but we're real close to it for this price point. This rod can be a competitor's rod. It handled well. It is very light. And because it balances well, because I'm not even going to get back into that. I heard another person mention about shaking the rod like this, talking about if you can handle that, as if your carpal tunnel don't kick in, ask Gary Dobbins. about the importance of balancing a rod. I mean, if you don't want my 48 years, why don't you take his 50 some odd years and the fact that he's made some of the best rods in the business. Speaking of Dobyns, this rod is better than the Dobyns Fury. Just saying. If you're in a store anywhere and you need to purchase a rod, I know name brand wise, people want to look to Dobyns. Dobyns has some of the best rods in the $200 to $400 price points. That's the sweet spot for Dobyns rods, which makes a competitor would lose. And below $150, this rod is a really good competitor. Once again, and I said this in the last video, the only rod that is, in my mind, giving it any real competition is that 13 Fish and Omen. They put some remarkable investment in that, and it's going to be hard to beat that investment. Now, this rod is a fantastic, now this is where I say it excels. This is a fantastic rod for single person float craft like kayaks and so forth. If you're a single person float craft, if that's the way you fish, you're going to love it. This butt never got in my way, ever. It never got in my way. And you get to use most of the rod in casting. So even though it's a 7-foot rod, the fact that the butt sits lower on the rod than most rods. Most rods will take up a full 15, almost 20 inches of space for the rod. And although you have 7-foot rod, you really only using maybe, 6.5 feet of it. You're not really using a lot of rod. So this made it a lot better for use. Now, the stripper guide, perfect. The choke guide, perfect. It's a little small for my taste, but it didn't get in the way. Now, like some other rods that are made around here. Now, one other thing, I love how it performed when it came to setting the hook on fish. Whether I was using a reaction bait or a finesse bait, I enjoyed the retrieve of the fish. I enjoyed the retrieve of the bait. Did very well in the water. Now, there are certain challenges that this rod has. Number one, it performs much better with reaction bait than it does with finesse bait. It is not as sensitive a rod as you would like to have for a finesse bait. Now, was it sensitive? Yes. It is sensitive enough for those of you who are not competing. Let me say that again. If you're out fun fishing, it's sensitive enough for you to feel the fish. Now, if you are competing, I would prefer that you find other rods that are more sensitive. You're going to have to spend the money for them. Because remember, and just understand this when it comes to fishing rods, the money is in spinning rods on the finesse side. The BassX is a good rod for beginners who really want to go way up there and get started, or intermediates who want a little better rod than the $70 to $100 rod can afford you at that time. I would not have a problem personally, even though I think it's a little better rod. If I only had to choose between the 13 Fish and Omen, the Veritas, the Dobyns, or the BassX, I would only choose from between the BassX and the Omen, the 13 Fish and Omen 3, and I would close my eyes and pick one. Whoever had their eyes open would mix it up, and I would just pick up one, and that would be my rod. I mean, this rod is a great rod. It performed a lot better in its category, and you're going to keep hearing me say that, in its category. I threw crappie baits with ease, and it launched them. Now, remember, my line is 15-pound test break strength, but the diameter of my braided line is 2 pounds, and my fluorocarbon is a 15-pound fluorocarbon, which is giving me what is called in fly fishing a forward taper. meaning there's weight on the end of this in addition to the lure, so I can throw things a lot further than most people would who throw crappie baits. Even a 1/16 or a 1/32, I can just throw it further. So, and all that weight transfer makes a difference. And the sensitivity was there. Not as much as I would like, but it was there. You know, there were many times when I defaulted to the way I fish so I could feel a little bit better. But if I were stuck, let's say I'm in an area where there's a lot of moving water and this is where I am. Well, this worked out nicely. I like the way it performed when catching the fish. Remember, this is a medium action. Yeah, this is a medium power. Watch where it bends. It's a medium power, fast action though. So even though it's a medium power, notice where it's bending. It's bending in the top third. Right there, it's bending in the top third, which is saying when it bends in the top third right there, it's saying that it has some resistance. That adds to the finesse category. But again, I think it could be a little bit more finesse, but it's much more finesse. I would prefer this over the Dobbins for finesse fishing if I'm going to go in that direction, if I'm going to do a head-to-head competitor. I won't even touch the Veritas in that same category. Just forget about that. And let's take several different types of rods that are in that price point. I can, and maybe you can, in the comments below, tell me, what do you think can compete with the BassX? I don't think there is any. I just don't. Not in that price point. I already seen what Dan Johnson said, who represented St. Croix at the iCast show in 2021, a bunch of months ago. He reintroduced the world to BassX, and you've heard me talk about it in the last video. And I think this is going to be their bass rod, and it is performing quite nicely. I would recommend it to anyone. I also would recommend that you stay tuned for any of the kind of specials that might be going on, because there's always going to be a special somewhere, somehow. Look for competition. Look for price competition and compare the two. Go for the best deal that you can. I know there's some websites like American Legacy Fishing. If you just sign up for them, I'm itching. If you just sign up for them, they'll give you 10% off on your first purchase. Use that for this. You know, a few dollars off is a few dollars off. At least it'll pay for your taxes. So with that said, thank you for watching. No matter what, please don't break your family's budget trying to buy this particular rod or any rod that I talk about, or any rod period. But within the law, good ethics, do everything you can to break your personal best. I'll see you in the next video. Have a great time out on the water. Take care. Be blessed.